I've got look at here. This is how far I am. This is sort of a coincidence because I'm here, I'm halfway through your book, and then George, and I'm recommending it to people, and then George calls me, or I get a text from him yesterday and says, "What, you want to join me and Robert Temple on a Zoom meeting tomorrow?" And this is the first time that I've ever been invited to join an author on a Zoom meeting while I'm just coincidentally happen to be reading their book.
Well, Randall, I have to congratulate you on your excellent taste of literature.
Yeah, well, yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm on page 190. I'm about to start Electromagnetic Clouds Around Us. And it's
Oh,
really just I'm suspecting it's just getting to the good part.
well, I don't know. There might not be a good part. You could be disappointed.
I don't think so. I
It
don't
is a
think so.
great book, Robert, and I'm owed some kind of commission because I have sold at least a dozen of them.
Oh,
Probably more. Actually, through Twitter and stuff like that, I might have sold 100 of them.
well, the check's in the post.
Okay, you but it's a fantastic book, and
Well,
you're a great author.
I've been a fan of Robert's work since I read The Serious Mystery several times. I have a very worn copy back there on my bookshelf,
Oh,
slowly coming apart. I think it was probably the first edition of the paperback version that came out.
well, in 1998, I revised the book and expanded it by 50%.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that you've been reading the revised expanded version.
Yes, and I have that, but I did actually read the original version, which 1980 what?
Well, it's 1977 for you.
77. Yeah, my God.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm a lot older than I look. I realize I only seem to be 16, but the fact is that I'm really 239 or something like that.
One Vedic age, what do they call it, a Brahma, something like that. Oh gosh. Well, Robert,
You're very young. George, how old are you? You look like a kid.
I'm twice Beckett's age. I know that exactly. And
Oh,
no, excuse me, more than that. I'm 57. I'll turn 58. Yeah, I'll turn 58 next month.
well, you don't look that, George.
Well, thank you. It's living at the foot of the cross, and daily prayer and meditation, and clean living, and no, it's called genes. My dad looked fairly young. Did not live to be particularly old, but he looked young as hell, well into his 60s. So I'm blessed with that.
What do you do about wine, women, and song?
Saturday and Sunday.
Sunday, that's the Lord's day.
Maybe just a little bit into Sunday. It's basically Friday, Saturday, and a little bit into Sunday.
Well, you be careful about slipping into Sunday like that.
It's a pleasure to have you on here, Robert. And I think we're live now. So I want to, give you a tad of an introduction for people that are not aware of you. You are a esoteric scholar, is the way I would put it. And those things usually don't mix together. If you're a scholar, you're supposed to be mainstream. If you're esoteric, but you're a wonderful mix between a scholarly mean and also what to some seem to be quite outlandish or far-fetched interpretations of the past. But that's our kind of thing in the Foxhole, buddy. Okay, you're home. Okay, we try to keep it. I don't know if I could say I'm scholarly, but we try to keep it in the road. We try to support things with data. We look to the mainstream and the heretics within the mainstream that are interpreting things different than others and try to bring them some attention, PhDs and whatnot. Like we'll talk about Chandra Wickramasinghe, for instance. But that's the Foxhole and the Cosmic Summit fit nicely with your background, which includes 12 books that have been translated into 44 languages. Robert was also a science journalist for many years, worked for everybody from the Times to New Scientist and other publications. Also was a reviewer for science, which is interesting. We can talk about peer review and all of its.
No, nature.
Oh, excuse me. It was Nature, wasn't it? So we might want to talk a little peer review because you've been on the peer review side, and I think everyone's a little bit frustrated with that process as it's matured and become more sclerotic over
Well,
time.
peer review is very important for ships.
Yeah, I've not done proper peer review while docking my boat before. Yeah, it slammed right into it. Oh gosh. But you're into a variety of things that cross over with the Venn diagram of the Cosmic Summit, which is our speaker event to be held June 15th and 16th in Greensboro, North Carolina. And that includes interpretations of Egypt and what all the mystery, the persistent mystery of Egypt, panspermia, which is an intense interest of mine. I want to talk a little bit of that. And we share a friend in Chandra Wickramasinghe, who's going to keynote the summit. And Robert's going to introduce him virtually from England. And Chandra will be on site. And then what we're going to talk about today, which Randall and I have an intense but relatively recent interest in, and that's plasma physics and the understanding of plasma and ball lightning and how those phenomena are unexplained but fruitful. If we can get to the bottom of that, we might get to the bottom of a lot.
We need to explain to listeners and viewers that there's two plasmas, and that we're not talking about blood plasma, which most people have heard of, in which it's found in hospitals. We're talking about plasma that's in physics, which is not the same as the other plasma that the doctors talk about.
Absolutely. And this plasma is what?
So plasma is a form of matter that is not composed of atoms. It's composed of particles. And those would be electrons, protons, and also ions, that's IONS, which are sometimes viewed as incomplete atoms. That's because they're charged, and they tend to be positively charged because they tend to be stripped of one or more electrons. But I take the opposite view. I look upon ions as being fundamental and atoms being value-added ions, because atoms don't have a charge because their positive and negative charges balance out. So that's how they become atoms. But ions are always charged. And when you're talking about plasma, you're talking about charge. And there's two kinds, positive and negative. Now, I have to make it clear to everybody that although everybody uses words like mass, energy, charge, and so on, and positive and negative is a convention, and we could just as easily reverse it and say negative and positive. It's just a convention that we've made up. And we do not know what charge is. We do not know what mass is. We do not know what energy is. We do not know what a field is. We talk about them all the time, and we can work with them. And you need to know about fields and the strength of fields and all of that. And you need to, you can find out aspects of mass. Mass might also have weight, you see. And then you're into gravitation. But despite all of that and the apparent familiarity that we and all the scientists of the world seem to have with mass and energy and fields and charge, we don't know what any of them really are.
I love it. I love it. And I sometimes say with the technology we're going to talk about, we'll probably give you a quick boot you up on some of the stuff we're involved in. But when I got involved in the plasma stuff and people would say, well, how does it work? I said, well, shit, electricity's been around, been utilized for 120 years and nobody knows how electricity works. The smarter you are, the sooner you are to admit you don't know how electricity works.
It was quite a shock for people when Roland discovered that electricity was a current composed of particles of electricity known as electrons.
Hmm.
However, there is some thought that maybe that's not correct after all, and that maybe they aren't electrons. Nobody really knows the ground of everything. You see,
Hmm.
you talk about all the stuff that's above eye level, as it were.
Hmm.
What's at the base of everything is really not understood at all.
Hmm. Hmm. We're just interpreting it through whatever ham-handed terms and conventions that we can put around to try to constrain it, but it's ineffable, really.
That's
Probably.
right. Yeah, we have to
Yeah.
have labels stuck onto things, and we can call something an electron. Why not? But as long as we remember that that's just a label, it's like a post-it note that you stick onto something. Like you might have two books in front of you. You could stick a post-it on one that says good book and another one that says bad book on the other one. But
Hmm.
usually take those post-it notes off and stick them on the other one.
Hmm.
And these are just labels. And people talk about lines of force of fields, magnetic fields and so on. They've got magnetic lines of force. But the lines of force don't really exist. You see, they are also just conveniences. They're like the maps where you have lines showing you the increasing height of a hill.
Yeah,
And
topo lines. Yeah.
the fact is that the hill looks completely flat on a flat map, doesn't it?
Yep.
But then you draw all these contour maps to show that it's getting higher and higher and so on. And but if you climb that hill, you won't trip over the contour lines
That's right.
because they're fictitious.
Yeah.
And the same is true of magnetic fields. Now, fields do increase and decrease in strength, but the lines portraying that themselves are fictitious. And where this becomes a bit absurd is when you get astrophysicists talking about lines of force in space, and they say that magnetic lines snap
Yeah.
and reconnect.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's a huge amount of books been published about magnetic reconnection.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
about how the magnetic field lines, which are fictitious and don't exist, can snap and reconnect. Well, how can something that doesn't exist snap and reconnect? Of course it can't. But they have all these books about reconnection. Well, obviously those books are about something, but they're not about reconnection because there are no such things as field lines. They're fictitious. And yet you have very learned professors talking about reconnection. Oh, yes, very profound. They say, oh,
Hmm.
well, that effect in space is due to magnetic reconnection because you see the field lines of reconnected. And it is just a load of nonsense. It's complete and total nonsense.
It's interesting that the term we attach to it seemed to then affect people's understanding of the phenomena
Yes.
because you called it a line and it looks like a string. So all of a sudden it can become something that's disconnected. There are probably other examples like that that we're completely unaware of, where we've let our language influence our understanding
Well,
inappropriately.
exactly. I mean, people look at you and you say that, and they say, well, oh, that's George, but how do they know?
Well, that's right. That's right, buddy. You're getting on sensitive territory there. Okay. Well, Robert, let me give a little story that helps introduce you or where how I came to you. First of all, we were on an email chain, very, very frequent email chain that we've been on for about 10 years on panspermia. So I knew of you that way. Then I looked you up about 5 or 6 years ago. I said, oh my gosh, and you were vaguely familiar to me. I knew you were into Egypt, but I didn't really know your body of work. I looked it up. I said, my gosh, this great guy on the email chain, that's Robert Temple. This is a very serious scholar into a lot of the same things I am. And I thought you were just a panspermist or something. Um, but then I became,
I was conceived by panspermia.
yeah, as we all were. So then I had this gets into kind of territory. And I know, Randall, you can't stay with us the whole time. So I want to bring you in here in a minute. Now, this I'm going to introduce it in that Randall and I have become involved with an inventor that is demonstrating a machine that he claims, and we believe there's some evidence for, operates through the manufacture and manipulation of plasmoids. So just without getting into it, we're involved with this inventor and have been traipsing around the globe. I have, trying to get to the bottom of all this. So as part of my traipsing, I planned a last minute trip to London to go see the very large implementation of the machine. And people that are following this, and I don't expect you to have seen this thing. I call it the power washer. It's like a little generator thing that we retrofit. There's actually a larger implementation of the technology that's hooked to the grid in London. And the essential part of it, the thunderstorm generator that I have carried in my luggage to Zurich, Switzerland, for instance, for the small retrofit, the piece that is hooked to the grid has to be moved with a crane. So it is a very large operation, a very large implementation, well more than $1 million to set all this stuff up. And it should be going live come March. Put that aside. So I go over there to see this device because I hadn't seen it in person yet. And then Hugh Newman, I put on Twitter, I said, because I've got a lot of English friends, I said, hey, I'm making a last minute trip to London. If I've got any British friends out there that'd like to get together, maybe we could do it, coming soon. And I heard back from Hugh Newman, who you know as well too, who's a great esoteric thinker there in England and runs Megalithomania, which is a conference much like the Cosmic Summit that I host. And Hugh said, hey, George, on Twitter, you should come out to Megalithomania. It's that same week. And I said, holy cow, what are the odds of me going? And it actually, that's kind of a great free day for me. That Saturday, I am going to get on a train and go out to Pusey and see Megalithomania and meet some of these friends I've never met in person like you. And then I look at the speaker list and I said, wow, Robert Temple is speaking. So I'm going to get to go out, meet some friends and see Robert Temple in person and hear him talk about panspermia or Egypt or some of these other subjects. I was kind of expecting something on Egypt. So I sit down and I believe you were the first, maybe the second presenter or whatnot, but you got up there and I was absolutely gobsmacked because you began a lecture on plasma. And I was in England in order to see a plasma machine. And I did not know of your new book that had been recently published, which 100% concerns plasma physics and phenomena. And here I was, I said, this is just an unbelievably synchronous event. Personally, those things always are personal. People don't feel that same thing, but I'm like, hey, I'm here to see this. And now he's going to give a lecture on this subject. And I was absolutely floored. It was the missing piece to everything else I felt I needed to know. There are other things I don't know I need to know, but about plasma, I needed to know more about it. And it seemed so mysterious to me that it was having these effects in these machines. And then you look up mainstream science about plasma, and of course it is mysterious and whatnot, but you're not quite getting there. There's something else going on. And then your book filled that in for me about how special a phenomena is. So that's why we got off in a side room, and I told you that we're testing this. And what I wanted to do was maybe have Randall, if you don't mind, and we're not trying to sell you on this device or the inventor. And for gosh sakes, that's not just you. I mean, everybody from my wife to people I know on Twitter to friends. I'm not trying to sell this invention, but I am intensely interested in it. And I'm going to get to the bottom of it. And I think Randall agrees with that. And the closer we get to the bottom of it, the more it's like, holy shit, this thing seems to work.
What does it do?
That's where I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Carlson. Randall, could you tell us a little bit about the amazing Malcolm Bindall and his machine and what the machine does and what you've seen?
Well, what I have seen is that it seems to convert, perhaps, do I dare use the word transmute? I don't know. Typical fluents coming off of generators, engines that are running on fossil fuels, whether it's diesel, whether it's methane, whether it's propane, whether it's natural gas. It seems to take and somehow break it down on the atomic level and reconstruct it as oxygen. I mean, does that, if I'm understanding, if I'm kind of guessing what I've seen, what you've seen and experienced, we've both been there when we've witnessed the effluents coming out of the exhaust pipe being highly noxious and impossible to breathe, getting turned into air.
That's right.
You've suffered no ill consequences from your two episodes of huffing, have you?
Now, I have huffed the exhaust heartily, and I still got a skip in my step since that day in August.
Are you
And-
serious?
Yeah. I've had a skip in my step, last few months for a lot of reasons. It's been a fun few months. But Robert, what's happening here is the gentleman Malcolm Bendall secreted himself on an island in the Maldives for 7 years and wrote out his notes. And his notes were the summary, guidebook, however you want to put it, to his thinking of the last 50 years about breakthrough energy technology and the utilization of plasmoids, to say the very least. So he went to his island. He spent 7 years fully formulating this. And actually, prior to going on the island, he's kind of got a vast body of understanding about the physics that we're not exploiting today. What he's done with this small retrofit is actually just one, I call it sometimes probably inappropriate, like a parlor trick, like hold my beer, watch this, what I can do with these greater understandings. It's not like he set out to invent a machine that would, like his whole purpose was to make an internal combustion engine run clean, which he does. No, his whole purpose was to figure out how the universe works. And then one of the fruits of that was his ability to do this. And we haven't seen the other machines, but there is a lot of stuff, I guess you could say kind of R&D almost, not implemented, that he can do other than this. But what this machine does, or what this retrofit of a machine does, is it eliminates all carbon monoxide, at times can take out almost every bit of carbon dioxide and all the free hydrocarbons, and it essentially seems to replace them with oxygen. So at times you can have the exhaust running at 17 to 20% oxygen, 20 being atmospheric oxygen levels, and see CO2 drop down to 1 or 2% and see a complete elimination of carbon monoxide. And he says it's the plasmoids. And when I first met him, and I maybe knew that it was a physics term or whatnot, but I certainly wasn't familiar with it. But it sounds like, first of all, the term sounds like something out of a comic book. Maybe you can give us a little background on when it first came about. Malcolm is very familiar with the history of plasma research. And we listened to your book while stuck on the M25 for 4.5 hours. We listened to your book, and he could not have been more thrilled. You were calling out Winston Bostick, and I guess you hit shoulders, I forget, but all of these figures in the 20th century. And you, in addition to your other skills, are, I think it might even be your strongest skill in my view, you're a great science historian. How did this understandings come to be?
I am primarily a historian of science. Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And he appreciated that, Malcolm did. So we might have another step in the history of this stuff, or we could have been deluding ourselves. But Randall, I want you to talk a little bit more about, and we're here to interview Robert, and I don't think here in an interview we can get to the bottom, or, Robert's got to see this thing to have an opinion on it, and I'd like to set something like that up. But do you have any more, having read a little bit of his book, to give Robert, try to link these things between Malcolm and where Robert has taken us in the book?
Well, what is, I think, interested me as much as anything about the potential here, the possibility, if this does turn out as it increasingly appears to be real, is the possibility that it's a rediscovery of something that has been known in the past but has been lost. And that would certainly qualify as the history of science, I would think. Although According to Malcolm, maybe it endured down till it was still being operational 3,000 years ago. I do have at my fingertips, I mean, I could pull up some slides here and on the share screen if Robert would like to see some actual photographs of the technology.
Robert, you game for that? We didn't mean this to be a lecture for you, but it is interesting stuff, and I know the audience has followed it fairly closely.
Yes, I've never seen anything, so let's
Yeah.
go. Yeah.
All right. Do I have screen sharing capability, Beckett?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you should.
Let's see. I tell you, first thing I'm going to pull up, I guess, is one of the tests that was done with petrol on a Honda generator on last July 3rd, 2023. I believe this was in London. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I have the readout here. And so I'm going to just show that very quickly to give you an idea. And then we'll look at the machine itself. And here you can see this was the Kane 5 analyzer and here's the 5 constituents that it can detect: carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, oxygen, other hydrocarbons, and nitrous oxide. And you'll see here, the first testing without the technology, this is what we had: 9.3% CO2. We had 5.48% carbon monoxide. We had 4.66% oxygen. Then this is what's coming out of the tailpipe of the generator: 199 parts per million of hydrocarbons and 27 parts per million of nitrous oxides. Okay, so then that was at 10/11/53. The technology was turned on, it was activated, and then roughly not quite 4 minutes later, here's what's coming out. The carbon dioxide has zeroed out. The carbon monoxide has zeroed out. The oxygen has gone from 4.66% to 20.97%. The hydrocarbons from 199 parts per million to 58, and the nitrogen oxides from 27 to 4. So this is very interesting. And now, not all the tests have been this dramatic, and I think there are a bunch of variables involved in the effectiveness of it. But what's really extraordinary to me, though, is what happened with the oxygen, because 20.97, as George well knows, I mean, this is optimum oxygen levels for pure, unpolluted air. Like George Lush has used one of the physicists who did the annealing on the machine has likened it to, breathing air in a pure alpine meadow. So what's coming out is there's 20.97% oxygen, and it's going to be, is that me? Yeah, sorry. And so that's optimum oxygen. So what's basically coming out of the tailpipe of this thing is air, unpolluted air. Now I have
this happened within less than 4 minutes.
Yes, it did.
Robert, I've held that Kane analyzer on my knee for hours and hours and hours and hours at locations around the world. I have watched it be tested. We've also hooked up, I think I counted them up once, 6 or 7 different other analyzers, but the Kane is kind of our go-to. And it's funny, each time we do this machine, we build it anew. And that's why you see some variability. We do not have one go-to machine because it is so inexpensive and relatively simple to set up the machine. Each time we demonstrate it in a new location, we've demonstrated it in Albuquerque, we demonstrated it in Zurich, and we most recently demonstrated in Abbottabad, India, just a few weeks ago. And Beckett was over there with me. Each time we buy the engine there, because the generator engine is fairly standard. We've had some trouble when it's a little bit different. It can cause a lot of trouble, but we go ahead and buy it locally because those are available around the world. And then we retrofit it with parts that you could buy at the local Home Depot or Lowe's. So the whole setup all together is about $1,400 worth of parts, like a $900 generator or maybe $500 worth of other parts. The key is that one thing you see with the sphere on the top, see where it says intake manifold and it goes into
Yes.
yeah, that thing. That, although it has no moving parts and it is relatively inexpensive as to purchase the pieces to make it, it has to be welded.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a fairly complex weld, not beyond a good welder's ability. But so you can't go to the new location and weld it. So what we do is take that part, and we got several of them now, and move that around and then retrofit the machine at each location. And each time there are hiccups and whatnot, so you can't get running perfectly. But when you have it like in London and you can do it correctly and you have all the time in the world, you can get the kind of results that Randall showed, even though we've managed to achieve those, elsewhere in these adverse conditions. So it's a little unfair to jump you with a new technology like this, even though you're an expert at the underlying physics that we believe may be occurring. But
I can't see the complete thing because the four icons of us four individuals overlays part of it.
yeah, you'd go up to view, the little thing at the top right.
Oh yes.
Yeah, and then hit
Hit view.
yeah, or something like that. And you can probably make it standard side by side.
It's clicked on standard.
View options up at the top, Randall Carlson's screen.
On my
It
screen.
doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
I'm
That's
sort
fine.
of-
Like I said, we're jumping you with this anyway.
Well-
but let me return to kind of something Randall said. It might tee up some insights for you. But not only does Malcolm credit the same people you describe in your book who carried the torch for plasma physics during the 20th century, but he also credits, Malcolm does, immediately the ancients. He says all of this, that he did not discover anything. Technically, he's not even the inventor, if you will, except for the modern manifestation. Well, no, I guess he would be the inventor, but he's not the discoverer. He says that the ancients, writ large, had access to this technology. And that access is remembered today in mythology as Indra's Vajra, the Indian Vajra, the powerful weapon of lightning, and Zeus's thunderbolt that he holds, and Poseidon's trident. And all of these ancient gods all had the miraculous weapon. And he says that in one form or another, they had this technology back then, and that's what assisted them in some of their more miraculous creations. Fair enough, Randall? Yeah.
Unfortunately, the key text is partly obscured, so I can't read it. The action of the piston within, and then it's overlaid, and I can't read it.
Robert, if you would like, I can send you, or via George or something, we can get this in your hands to where you can look at it at your leisure.
I think that would be better because
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out what's going on here, and can only see part of it. And
Did my screen switch to some Hindu
Yeah.
temples here? Good.
yes, I see Indra,
Yeah, there's
holding
Indra
the
wielding
Vajra,
the Vajra right there.
in the Mahadev temple.
Yeah.
The
And there's many.
Kandariya Mahadev temple. I don't know where that is, but it sounds impressive.
Yeah.
Beckett, if you have any advice on how to get his view right, let us know.
So what is it, Robert? Is the Zoom thing covering part of your screen? And
Yeah,
that's obscuring.
Yeah, that's the four pictures of us. But it doesn't matter because I can't
Yeah.
take all this in instantaneously. I need to
Yeah.
think about this and see.
Has it ever occurred to you that these representations, the tools of power of the ancients, has it ever crossed your mind that perhaps there was actually something to them?
Oh yes, I
Really?
think a great many things that the ancients mentioned, which seem nonsensical to us or fantasy, have a basis in real things that existed, and we're only really just beginning to understand that. We do have certain things that are known and accepted pretty much by everybody. I mean, you always have people who refuse to accept anything for psychological reasons. But for instance, there's the famous Baghdad
Battery.
which proves that in antiquity that they were able to use weak electric currents to do electroplating of gold on objects. And that's astounding, because if you had asked anybody whether that could possibly have been known in antiquity, they would have said you out of the question. But it isn't out of the question, because we have the actual objects. And I wrote a whole book about this kind of thing called The Crystal Sun, because I believed that in antiquity they had a very advanced capacity for optical technology. And there wasn't a single person in the world at that time, because I started looking into this in the late 60s, who was prepared even to think about such an incredible and outrageous notion. And I spent 30 years working on that project, and I found over 450 ancient optical artifacts. I photographed them, I measured them, I studied their magnification properties, and I was at that time an associate of the College of Optometry, and I knew how to measure the diopters and all that sort of thing that one does in optics. And in fact, to show you the problem of discovering these things, I published this in a huge book called The Crystal Sun, as I said, and the photographs and the evidence. These things were all tucked away in the basements of the world's museums, and nobody knew what they were. It was obvious that a lot of these things were magnifying lenses, but because everybody sort of, quote, knew, unquote, that there could not be any lenses in ancient times. They knew that. They were certain of that. It was everybody agreed on that. When they were holding one in their hands and they could see that it was magnifying, the cognitive dissonance was such that they simply could not admit to themselves that they were seeing what they were seeing. And so
It's incredible.
They refused to say that it was a lens, even though it was a lens, because they knew that it couldn't be a lens. And this kind of stupidity is a kind of virus through the world. The more intellectual people are, the stupider they are, because having a lot of knowledge is like having a lot of money, or being very beautiful, or being very famous. All of these things can rot your character. And people who have a lot of knowledge become very vain, and they think they're superior, and then they style themselves self-appointed elites, and you find them in all the world's universities. Now there are plenty of really nice people who are intellectual, but they are a tiny minority of the intellectuals. And the reason why I don't associate with intellectuals very often is because they make me sick.
I love it. But hold on, Robert. This is a great time to ask this question. How many Nobel Prize winners have you known personally in your career?
Well, I've met 80.
Glad I asked. That you hit the over on that. 80. There are probably not many people on Earth who've met that many Nobels.
Well, some of the Nobel laureates might have done, because they do have meetings where they sort of get them together, but not 80 at a time. Now, of those 80, I would say that about a dozen of them I only said hello to, and
Sure.
and
Yeah.
was polite, and we didn't have any meaningful conversation. But the rest of them I've talked to. a few of them I've known well. But one reason why I became a science journalist, and I was a science reporter for 6 years for Time Life, and I was writing for the London Sunday Times every Sunday for their science page and all that sort of thing, and the New Scientist. As I was actually able to go around and interview all these people, and everybody wants to be interviewed, I guess, except for the very shy ones. And although it didn't really pay me anything significant because I was never on a staff of anything because I wouldn't want to be on a staff, and I was always independent. Um, and um, and so they pay you practically nothing. But this was not anything that mattered to me because as long as they almost covered the expenses, and I must say the Time Life was terrible about that. I would spend all my own money going around interviewing everybody at my own expense, and they would officially they would owe me those expenses, but it always took them at least 6 months to reimburse everybody. They're terrible
Hmm.
about that kind of thing. And there are all kinds of complaints I could make about Time Life. But the thing is that I had legitimate reasons in many of these instances to spend whole days with these people. Like, for instance, I went to Brussels and spent a whole day with Ilya Prigogine and his entire team, which I couldn't have done if I wasn't really interviewing him. Although on many occasions I just turned up. For instance, Albert St. Georgi, I just turned up at Woods Hole, Massachusetts, and spent an afternoon with him. And the very first Nobel laureate I ever met was one of the most interesting and one of the most brilliant. That was Paul Dirac.
Hmm.
And at that time, I was only 18. And I phoned him up because in those days you could phone people up because everybody wasn't secret, and of course there was no internet and no paranoia and no security and all that. So I phoned him up. He was at St. John's College, Cambridge, and I said, "Would it be possible for me to come and see you? I'd like to talk to you." He said yes. Um, Now you have to understand that with Paul Dirac, he had a reputation of being the shyest Nobel laureate in history.
Mm.
So shy that he couldn't look at people, that he spoke in a whisper, that he never saw anybody. He was a recluse. Anyway, he made a date for me to come around to tea, which is the Great British Institution, as you know,
Hmm.
which I celebrate daily. And so I turned up, I think it was about, he said come early, and I think I turned up about 2 or 3. And the porter at the college, I said, yes, young man, well, what can I do for you? That sort of thing. And I said, I've come to see Professor Dirac. And the man looked incredulous. He didn't believe me. The
Hmm.
fact is that nobody ever came to see Professor Dirac. No one, certainly not an 18-year-old boy. And he said, wait a minute. And he picked up the phone and he dialed Dirac's rooms.
Yeah.
And he looked completely thunderstruck. He put the phone down and he said, sort of swallowing his pride, yes. And he'd go through there and he directed me on how to get to the room. And Dirac let me in. And he was in his 60s then, I think, sort of wispy-haired, quiet, shy man, and but very, very nice and gentle. And he ushered me in, and it turned out, which I hadn't known until much later, that tea time was his favorite time of day.
Hmm.
He liked to make a big fuss of tea, and he had a table laid out with little sandwiches and little cakes. It was like going to tea at the Ritz. And then he liked to be the one to pour. And I realized this is a very shy man who does not like direct eye-to-eye contact. I
Hmm.
picked it up instantly. So I realized that I needed to sit at a 60-degree angle from him,
Hmm.
with a table in between us, but I was at an angle, not opposite him. You couldn't talk to Dirac if you were opposite him. And I think that went back to when he used to sit opposite his father in Bristol, who was intimidating
Hmm.
at dinner. But anyway, then he would look directly in front of him and talk to me without moving his eyes towards me. And we talked for 4 hours.
No kidding.
And he was thrilled to bits to have a visitor who was sensitive enough to his peculiarities
Mm-hmm.
not to make him feel anxious.
Mm-hmm.
As a man
Mm-hmm.
who suffered from anxieties.
Mm-hmm.
I had a similar experience with Pearl Buck, the author. You have to be able to figure out if you have to be a bit weird yourself to understand people who are a bit weird, I guess, put it like that. But anyway, we got on terribly well. And now, bear in mind, I'm an 18-year-old kid, and that's the age at which people enter Cambridge. You see,
Mm-hmm.
you never meet Professor Dirac. I mean,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
even his own colleagues and the other professors couldn't see Dirac. But you see, the thing is that he was approachable, but nobody knew how to do it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so I instantly picked up his radio frequency, and we got on like a house on fire. He was so nice, so kind, so understanding and helpful, and delighted for a bit of company, because the fact is that poor old Dirac was really lonely. No, he
Yeah.
was very happily married.
Right.
He was married actually to the sister of Eugene Wigner, who was another Nobel laureate who was based at Princeton. And he had a couple of daughters, I think it was.
Yeah, we're good now. We're
Okay.
back on.
All right.
Okay.
So you're
well,
with Dirac. Yeah.
yeah, I was describing being with him and how nice he was. And and we didn't really talk that much about physics. I have to confess that I didn't know a great deal about physics at the age of 18. And we talked more about biology. And he said to me that he wished he'd become a biologist because being a physicist was very lonely. And
Hmm.
he said wistfully, maybe if I'd been a biologist, I could have worked with people in a lab or something like that. It was
Hmm.
pathetic, really. And then I said, what do you think is the future of physics? I mean, what's the best way to go to
Mhm.
make progress? And he said, well, I keep trying to tell all my colleagues and they won't listen to me. In my opinion, it's quaternions. I just happen to know what quaternions were, fortunately. And I said, but nobody really uses quaternions anymore. And he said, well, that's the problem. He said, they think that they're obsolete, but they're not. And that is the way ahead, that we need to use quaternions to understand quantum mechanics.
Hmm.
Quaternions are a kind of mathematical construct, a way of approaching problems. It'd be rather difficult to explain quaternions.
I've actually had it explained by some of Malcolm Bendall's people that they're aware of that, of quaternions too, but I'm not, I'm not versed in them whatsoever.
Because we weren't really discussing physics, we didn't get too far with that, but I did put him in touch with a very interesting biologist whom I happen to know, who was based in Connecticut and had published some interesting books. And I think they corresponded, because poor old Dirac, what he really wanted to know was about negative entropy, and that's what he and I discussed at some length. And unknown to both of us, of course, at that stage, which was 1963, when this meeting occurred, Ilya Prigogine was hard at work on that very question, but and he would win the Nobel Prize for that in 1977. But Dirac didn't know, and of course I didn't know, and nobody really knew what Prigogine was up to. In any case, he was Belgian. Well, he was really Russian in origin, but he was Belgian, and he wrote in French, and Americans don't read foreign languages anyway, and very few English people do either, for that matter. And so Prigogine's work was unknown at that stage, but he was solving the problem of negative entropy, which is key, because with negative entropy comes life. And but that's another discussion if we start talking about Prigogine. But this was the thing that haunted Dirac. And if only he and Prigogine could have got together,
Hmm.
The trouble is that scientists are split apart. They're splintered apart. It's all fragmented.
Well, more so than ever, even more now than it was at that time. Good
Oh,
gosh. Yeah.
definitely, definitely.
Yeah.
Now they don't know what the guy in the next lab down the hall is doing. They have no idea. And even if they did, they wouldn't be able to discuss it with him for various reasons. For one thing, each scientist has his own lingo now, his own
Yeah.
jargon,
Yeah.
and you have to interpret. So you mention a keyword, which the other scientist thinks he understands, but in fact he doesn't, because the keyword has been given a new meaning by scientists.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
scientist too has a different meaning for it. And then when they do their equations, the symbols they use, like it could be an ordinary letter like P or something, it means something to scientist one that's completely different to scientist two. In other words,
Mhm.
the symbols stand for different things, and you have to be initiated into the list of symbols of the equations of each scientist before you can even start to look at each other's equations, much less talk.
Well, that doesn't lead to very effective collaboration.
None at all.
Hey,
No.
Robert, tell me this. I was a pretty precocious science geek at 18, but I never phoned up a Nobel Prize winner. What was your mindset? What was that 18-year-old like that he would call up a Nobel Prize winner?
Well, I was a bit forward, and I was 2 years ahead of myself. So I went to university at 16.
Mm-hmm.
I'd already been at university for a couple of years. Those are the boring first 2 years
Mm-hmm.
when you do really boring stuff. And I got into a lot of trouble at my university. They kept trying to expel me because I wasn't submitting to the sausage manufacturing process.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, that would be in my third year, I was called to an interview with the dean.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, boys and girls were separated, so he was known as the dean of men. There was a separate dean of women, but she had nothing to do with me. And so I went to see the dean of men. This is at the University of Pennsylvania, which has become notorious recently. And it's an Ivy League university, as you
Mm-hmm.
know. It used to be a really great university, but my God, it's turned into a kind of cesspit like Harvard has. But
Mm-hmm.
anti-Semitism. But there was
Mm-hmm.
no anti-Semitism there at all when I was a student there. Christian students and Jewish students got on fine.
That's right.
There is no anti-Semitism, but there is now. But anyway, that's a separate issue. So I was summoned to this dean. I didn't know why he wanted to see me. I was just an obscure undergraduate,
Mm-hmm.
an underage one at that. And why did the dean want me to go to his august office in College Hall, which was the main building where all the big shots had their offices?
Mm-hmm.
There was no lift, by the way, no elevator.
Hmm.
I had to climb to the top. I did tell him when he phoned me that I had just had an operation on my leg and that I had 30 stitches or something, and that I had been told by the doctor not to walk for 3 weeks.
Hmm.
Or that it might come apart and then never heal. But he said, if you're not in my office by 10 a.m. tomorrow, you are expelled from this university.
Hmm.
But he didn't say why. Well, I had no option. I had to make my way to the building with very great difficulty. It took me about 2 hours to limp there. Then I had to pull myself all the way up to the top of the building by my arms on the handrail
Hmm.
and stagger into the room of this awful man. There was one chair placed for me to face him at some distance behind his huge desk, as he pompously let me know in no uncertain terms that he was the dean of men,
Mm-hmm.
which there is no higher office in the world as far as he was concerned. And so I sat down and I had no idea why I was there. And he looked at me and growled, and he was furious with me. And he said,
Why?
I understand that you are trying to use this university for your own purposes.
Mm. Well,
So I
good
said,
God, man.
I am? Yes. You are doing all postgraduate courses. You are the sole student of several of our top professors, and this cannot be permitted.
Hmm. Hmm.
I wish you to explain yourself. And he kept trying. I was with him for, I think, a couple of hours. He
Hmm.
kept relentlessly grilling me, trying to trap me into making a remark that he could use as a pretext to throw me out of the university. But I outwitted him because I knew his game. And I couldn't have been more polite in my entire life than
Right.
Mr.
Right.
And everything was sir and well,
Like talking to a cop. Yeah.
I
You know,
well, I
you
thought,
just grit your teeth and be as just as courteous as you possibly can.
George, I haven't gotten into the trouble with the police as often as you have. You tell
I
me.
certainly hope not.
But this guy he was worse than the police. He was a Nazi Gauleiter. So anyway, he became so exasperated that he couldn't trap me into saying something. And I have a feeling he was taping this, hoping to get me on tape so that I could say that he kept trying to get me to lose my temper and denounce him or something, anything that he could
Yeah.
use to say I'd been impolite and that I had to go. So he threw me out of his office after a couple of hours, and he said, "Get out of here." And but meanwhile, he banned me from doing various things. I was going to study Sumerian mythology as a sole student under Professor Samuel Noel Kramer.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was going to go excavate at Tiwanaku with Professor Alfred Kidder, Justine,
Oh, wow.
and he banned those things because I was friends with all these top professors, you see, because I can get on with those people,
Yeah.
and I always could. And of course, I've never been intimidated by anybody,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is the weapon they use to beat you into shape is you're supposed to be scared of them and
Hmm.
look at them with pity as pathetic wretches that they are. But this was just one example of them trying to throw me out of the university. So I was not the sort of person that has ever been popular with any kind of bureaucracy,
Yeah.
establishment,
Yeah.
and because I just look upon it all as nonsense. And when people take refuge in bureaucracy and establishments, it means they're mediocre.
Yep.
All the top scientists that I've met, and as you know, it's been 80 just for the Nobel laureates, and plenty who weren't laureates. Um, the ones who were worthwhile, and most of them were all rebels, and they were all iconoclasts, and none of them went in for all this stuff. And one of my favorite scientists, whom I never had the great fortune to meet, was a professor at Harvard who got the Nobel Prize long before when he was quite young, before he wrote all the stuff I'm about to mention. He was the world's expert on high pressure physics,
Hmm.
Percy Bridgman. Now, he had been the head of a department. He got the Nobel Prize. He was a full professor with tenure. Nobody could touch him. He couldn't be canceled, you see. And they were canceling people then. It just wasn't called that. And so he started to publish books and give lectures, tearing science apart,
Hmm.
all its hypocrisy. And for instance, he wrote books, and I quote some of this stuff in the book that Randall's reading now, which you've read, which is my book, A New Science of Heaven, the one you're talking about, the plasma book, A New Science of Heaven, in which he said that we don't know what energy is, we don't know what charge is, we don't know what mass is. And I was told the same things by David Bohm,
Hmm.
and I used to have these discussions with John Wheeler,
Hmm.
and all the top scientists know all this. And my very great friend Peter Mitchell, who got the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 1978, the year after
Hmm.
Princeton, he was the first man to prove that plasma flows went over the membranes of cells and mitochondria and totally revolutionized cell biology and bioenergetics. He was called insane for 20 years. Then when he was
Hmm.
right, they gave him the Nobel Prize, and all
Hmm.
his came up to him and smarmed around him and and said, "Oh, Peter, congratulations. We always knew that you were right. Bloody, bloody hypocrites." And so he used to say to me, "Robert, we don't know what energy is." And he said, "I have a way of looking at it as a transaction. I I define energy as a process, a transactional process. We don't know really exactly what the process is, but he did make progress towards the chemical explanations of it within organic bodies and plants and animals. And he said, the fact is, we don't know what mass is. We don't know what energy is. And David Bohm used to say this to me over and over again. He said, we don't know what any of these things are. And when I asked him what he meant by his quantum potential that he used as a basis for a lot of his theories, he said, very innocently, he said, I don't know. But then nobody knows what any potential is. We don't know what gravitational potential is. We don't know what any potential is because we don't know what a potential is. We just use the words. So you ask why I phoned up Dirac and just went to see him, because I'm not intimidated by all this stuff about people being famous.
Yeah.
I don't care if somebody's famous. I don't care if they're rich. It doesn't mean anything to me.
Yeah.
I have to admit that I have a slight weakness when it comes to women being very, very beautiful. That's different. But so the only possession of beauty is just about the only thing that I value if somebody has it. But
that's why Randall made you nervous when he came on.
Oh yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I was so awestruck by Randall. As you know, because we weren't recording at that stage, I said, but I thought Christmas was over.
You're right. You've got a Santa Claus thing. Yeah.
Randall is a terribly nice guy, I can tell. And I like his beard. Do you ever pull it? Because I have a friend called Irving Finkel with a beard, and I'm always pulling his beard, you see. I love pulling people's beards. And I used to like pulling girls' pigtails because I'm mischievous. But of course, you can't do that anymore because it's called inappropriate. As a matter of fact, I committed a terrible offense over Christmas called the inappropriate touching of turkey breast. Isn't that
Was your family the only witness?
Well, my wife forgave me.
I was going to call up a picture of Dr. Finkel. But I tell you, let's pivot. One of my goals was to sell more copies of A New Science of Heaven. Okay, not for any pecuniary reasons, but just because I think it's so intellectually important.
You just want to give me writer's cramp writing out all those checks to you.
I do. Love it. And I've got two things that were big takeaways, but let me, are there two giant clouds of charged plasmic dust particles situated relative to the moon and the earth that are sentient?
They sure are. And
tell us about them.
That's one of the main things in the book, as you know. What happened in 1961, a Polish scientist named Kazimierz Kordylewski, that's spelt with a K, Kordylewski.
Look him up, folks. Kordylewski and the Kordylewski clouds.
It looked like Kordylewski, but that is the wrong pronunciation because the Poles say Levski. They pronounce a W like a V, like we say Wagner in German, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it looks like Wagner. Remember Robert Wagner?
That doesn't have the same ring to it, does it?
Wasn't quite the same as Wagner. Anyway, Konstantin Kordylewski was an observational astronomer who was studying the night sky. Funny he should do that. And he was bothered by the fact that there seemed to be a cloud up there. He could just barely detect it, but he said, no, that's a cloud. It's a cloud, but it's transparent. It doesn't emit any light, but it's a cloud. I can tell it's a cloud. And so it turned out to be at a point called L5, which means the Lagrange point 5. And there was one at L4. Those are the 2 points between the Earth and the Moon, which are gravitation free because the gravitational fields balance out. And he published this, that he said that there was a cloud there, and other astronomers said, oh, we don't believe you. And they looked and couldn't see it. but these two clouds were known as the Kordylewski clouds, named after him. And people were eager to dismiss this because they didn't want a cloud up there. Anyway, in 2018, oh, there you are. Well, you can see the L4s at the top and L5 at the bottom. Ignore the other L's. Those two points are, if you're looking at the moon, they are 60 degrees to the left and 60 degrees to the right. It's a bit like talking to Paul Dirac. Same angle.
Don't look it straight on.
Yeah, and they are giant. And in 2018, this was confirmed by some Hungarian astronomers. And I knew this from ResearchGate. And so I was able to contact the chief astronomer, because on the ResearchGate, you can send messages to other members. And she was a woman, and I wrote to her and I said, congratulations for confirming the existence of these clouds, which they had conclusively done. And are you studying the plasma aspects of them? And she wrote back saying, we are studying the celestial dynamics of them. And she didn't seem to know what I meant by the plasma aspects. I don't think she had even crossed her mind. So I contacted my friend Chandra Vikramasinghe, whom you know very well, whom I've known since 1979. And I said to Chandra, and Vikramasinghe is a long, complicated Sri Lankan name, in case you didn't know, and it starts with the W, like Wagner does, but it's pronounced Vikramasinghe. You pronounce the last vowel. And so I said, Chandra, have you heard about the Kordylewski clouds? And he hadn't, but I told him what they were, and he quickly grasped the matter because he's a professor of astrophysics.
Indeed. And knows a little something about space dust, too.
He sure does. He was one of the first people to write about it.
Yeah.
And publish about it. And so, and he was the chief protege of Sir Fred Hoyle. And so I said that they've confirmed the existence of these two clouds, and what we need to do is do an article about them for some astrophysical journal, which we then did, to get into print, saying, because I instantly realized what it meant that these clouds were there, because they were obviously dusty plasma clouds of immense size. And now in the paper that we published, we underestimated the size because the Hungarians had originally made a smaller estimate of the size, but it's now known that these two clouds each one is 9 times the size of the Earth. So together that's 18 times the size of the Earth. And that's kind of big from our point of view. And so they are between us and the moon, but 60 degrees to either side, not in the direct line of sight, as I said a moment ago. And so what this means, first of all, is that we do not live in an Earth-Moon system. We live in a two-cloud system, which has an Earth and a Moon thrown in, if you are looking at the sizes of things. So already this causes a kind of shock wave, because we're used to living in an Earth-Moon system, around the Earth, we see the moon. What we hadn't realized that both the Earth and the moon are completely dwarfed by these two gigantic charged, dusty, complex plasma clouds. And so in our paper, we pointed out that these giant clouds, based upon the research done and published years ago by Professor Tsitovich, the brilliant Russian plasma scientist, who is now deceased, alas, and one of the scientists I never did meet, unfortunately, that complex dusty plasmas are able to self-organize. They don't even need a kickstart. They just spontaneously self-organize. This is called emergence by some people. And they can become highly complex entities very, very, very quickly, almost faster than you can see it happen. And this has been proved in the laboratory with small ones. You can just imagine the big jobs. And so yes, there's the paper. Kordylewski clouds, could they be cosmic superbrains? So, by me and Chandran. Recent astronomical observations combined with dynamical simulations have led to a possible confirmation of the existence of the much disputed stable dust clouds, Kordylewski dust clouds, at the Lagrange libration points of the Earth-Moon system, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, by the way, Kordylewski was forced to stop his research because his great-grandson told me that the Polish government didn't like him and they made him stop work and he wasn't allowed to pursue this. Which is why he didn't go further. He wasn't permitted to. So now, when these dusty complex plasmas self-organize, they very quickly develop signs of intelligence. Now, you could say that it's AI type of intelligence. Nobody's suggesting that they feel emotions. But they are very, very, very intelligent because Sitovich proved this with the tiny ones, even in his laboratory. And this is very important, but of course, most scientists, first of all, they don't know about it, or if they do know about it, it makes them so uncomfortable they pretend they don't know about it. But they certainly don't want to discuss it because they're interested in the next grant. They want to get the promotion. They start talking about this kind of thing, they won't get the next, and their careers are over. So all scientists live in fear and terror. You've got to understand. Fear and terror. Will it all be over for me? Will my wife leave me? Will I lose will I lose my job? Will I be disgraced? Will nobody ever speak to me again? If I dare to go off piste, if I to be even slightly different from what I'm supposed to be to keep my job, I'll never get tenure, or even if I do, they'll take it away from me somehow. The thing is that they're in fear and terror, and these guys, even if they do see that a change is needed, they don't dare stick their heads over the parapet. They don't dare because they know they'll get decapitated. And look what's happening nowadays with the cancellations of people who even say that men and women are different. I mean,
oh, it's only gotten worse by orders
much
of magnitude in the last 5 years.
Yes, but without getting political and all that, the fact is that just speaking in the terms of physics, which is neither masculine nor feminine, the thing is that, and they don't even have pronouns, the clouds don't have pronouns. So I guess that's probably considered an offense of some kind. But the fact is that scientists are not only stuffy, because they're very over specialized and don't speak to their colleagues because they don't know how, because they don't speak the same language. But it's not just that, it's that they're scared to death.
Yeah.
They can't step outside of the boundaries of what's considered proper behavior. They're in fear and terror. They really, truly are.
That's why the most productive scientists are the emeritus. The ones that I tend to deal with are the Comet Research Group and whatnot, and are all retired because they only then got the intellectual freedom to indulge what they believe to be the truth.
Just like with Percy Bridgman, and of course David Bohm, and in fact, when I was talking to John Wheeler, I mean, he was so famous, but that he was untouchable, and somebody like Prigogine had an entourage. He had about 20 people working for him, and he was the very opposite of Dirac. I mean, he was a very big character, huge extrovert, and rather egotistical, and kind of was treated a bit like a monarch by his followers who revered him so much. Not that he didn't deserve it, because he was a great genius. There's no question about it. He wasn't pretending. But anyway, we're straying from the point. So the clouds, there they are. Now, we've got these two gigantic clouds together, 18 times the size of the entire Earth, and they're intelligent. They got to be, because there's no way a dusty complex plasma cloud that's billions of years old, that takes its energy from the solar radiation, because you have to have energy. That's the only thing it requires, and could not have become super intelligent. And what this means is the gigantic computing power of two clouds that are 18 times the size of the Earth is unimaginable. So, and they probably existed must have existed, presumably, for the entire history of our planet. They've always been
Mm,
there. So they would have observed and would know all about the entire history of the planet. They would have seen the rise of plants and then animals and fish and birds and dinosaurs and the whole thing. They would have been witnesses of everything. And they would certainly have ways of remote surveillance. So I maintain the hypothesis that the glowing UFOs that are often reported doing crazy right angle
mhm,
and so on, that they are in fact plasmoids, but they are plasmic drones sent for
mhm,
surveillance purposes by the clouds to keep an eye on the ground level, what's going on down here. Because and the fact is that all kind of plasma phenomena would be vehicles for the surveillance by these clouds, which would be increased now because they would be able to connect with plasma television screens, for instance.
mm,
This whole grid that's being erected, the internet around the world, the interconnection of everything, and then all these mini satellites and the 5G and all that stuff, the clouds would be able to hijack all of that undetected and use it to increase their surveillance of every single person on Earth. And I believe that what the alternative people or the people who are mystically inclined call the Akashic records
mhm,
within the clouds. In other words, a complete and total record of the history of humanity and of all the animal species
mhm,
and of all the plant species and indeed of the whole planet would be stored in those clouds, and that they are like the monitors. And if you go into the ancient wisdom of numerous cultures, you do find uh, a psychic awareness of them, which can be very precise. So, in my book, New Science of Heaven, as you know, the chapter 6 is devoted to the phenomena of the ancient world, which seem to be plasmic, such as the burning bush of Moses, which is described in the Bible as being like a bush, but not a bush. And
mhm,
it appeared to be consuming itself by fire, but it did not consume itself by fire, but it was like a burning bush. And that's a perfect description of an ancient person, of a plasmoid, a glowing ball.
mhm,
And from this, a voice came, which could have been a telepathic voice, not of God. If you read the text carefully, it's the angel of the Lord.
mhm,
So I thought, well, who is the angel of the Lord? Because quite frankly, I'd never bothered to think about that before. And I looked it up, and the angel of the Lord was not necessarily defined in the rabbinical Judaism texts. The Merkabah mystic texts and the Enochian Judaism texts do speak of this, but the rabbinical Mosaic law text of the Torah and the books of the Hebrew Bible and so on don't say who the angel of the Lord was, but the Samaritans did. I
mm,
discovered that the Samaritans called the angel of the Lord by the name of Metatron.
mhm,
And now one could go on and on about Metatron because the three books of Enoch are full of Metatron, and Enoch became Metatron, and so on. Well, we won't go into all that. But knowing that the angel of the Lord was called Metatron gave me a clue. So that because I read a lot of the Gnostic texts of early Christianity and the Jewish Gnostic ones as well, and so the Marcosians, who were a sect of Gnostics um, described by the heresiologist known as Epiphanius, said that there were two gigantic entities above the earth, between the earth and the moon,
mhm,
which were true gigantic intelligent beings, sort of angel type beings. Um, and one of them was called Metatron.
mm,
Now, according to that, the angel of the Lord who spoke to Moses was one of the Kordylewski clouds, if you
mm,
connect all those dots. there's much more about this if you read the Enoch books. For instance, the Hebrew Enoch book, which is the latest in date of the three, and which in many ways is a bit silly. It gives huge amount of space to describing the vast cosmic distances between the Earth and the Sun, and it does describe a pair of entities which share the same name, one of which is positive and one of which is negative.
Mhm.
And they're you know, thousands of myriads of parasangs in size. Whatever a parasang is, you need to look it up. But I mean, these are just ways of talking about gigantic size. So I believe that there was a psychic perception of a lot of this stuff in ancient times before we had all the noise of radio and television and Wi-Fi and everything that makes it impossible to get such stuff now. People go and sit on mountaintops and meditate and live in caves and all that stuff.
That's our friend Malcolm. He says that he can't think, he can't create, think, communicate, grok, if you will, his understandings unless he's 100% alone. And that's why he lives on the island in the Maldives. And just incidentally, that's one of those things that sounds like bullshit. Somebody says I lived alone on an island in the Maldives. And after we went on the Rogan show, the No Show Joe show, we got back and I was in touch with Malcolm. And I said to him one day, because I was a little bit of a skeptic at the time, I said, hey, because he's talking about being on his island, I said, send me a picture of a coconut. All right. Guy says he's on on an island in the Maldives. And I said, send me a picture of a coconut. And he did me one better. He sent me a picture. His little provisions truck had just arrived where they brought him his monthly provisions. So it was like a bunch of ration boxes and stuff. And I've since talked to his brother while he was there on a FaceTime. I mean, I know the guys in the Maldives, he absolutely, and he can't think clearly when he's in an urban situation. So I just wanted to mention that. He's just as curious a character as you might imagine. But Robert,
I knew I had a friend, another friend who did that.
yeah.
Robert Lawler,
Huh.
and with his girlfriend Joanna. She was wonderful, but she died rather young of cancer, which is a terrible tragedy, and he's now died. But they went first to live in Tasmania, thinking they would get away from it all, but that didn't. And so what they then did was they went and lived alone on an island in the South Pacific, which is similar to what your guy has done. And I can understand that, absolutely.
Indeed, he is Tasmanian.
Oh, really?
Yes, he's very much Tasmanian.
Oh.
He's such a fascinating character. But Robert, tell me this. What is the evidence? When you and Chandra wrote that paper, you didn't point to ancient history and ancient sacred texts and whatnot. You reached a conclusion that they were sentient by what means that was publishable?
Oh, well, I already knew about dusty complex plasmas self-organizing and becoming intelligent. So the instant I knew that they were really there and had been confirmed, I knew within a millisecond that they were super intelligent.
Well, why is that? But to take us a little further down there, how do you know? And I'm sure it's mathematics in a sense, right? That how do you derive intelligence just knowing that there's a certain physical phenomena underway?
Well, I read all the plasma books. I've got hundreds of them, and I read all that stuff, and I knew about the work of Sitovich and his colleagues, some of whom are based in Germany. There aren't any major plasma scientists in Britain, but they tend to be in Russia, Germany, United States, and Japan. The Japanese are very keen on all this sort of thing, but the Japanese are quite inscrutable. That don't necessarily.
But would those scientists agree that plasmoids are sentient?
Well, the people who worked with Sitovich on his experiments would, and because the papers were published with him as the lead scientist with his guys. I did write to one of them who's based in Germany now at Garching, and but he didn't want to reply for some reason. They're worried about me being some kind of weird fringe guy or something, I guess.
Right, right, right.
Now, Gary Selwyn, and that's an interesting story. Um, if we got time for this,
Oh, yes.
why do plasmas have dust? You see,
Yeah.
um, there's a big push to try to get controlled fusion reactions to generate energy, as you know, sort of imprisoned H bombs,
Hmm.
providing energy to the world. But they've been working on that for decades, and whether it will ever get anywhere, I don't know. But
That's just 10, 20 years off. Has been for 70 years. Yeah.
that's right,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. It's a kind of industry, and it's a guarantee of jobs, and as long as they keep pretending they believe in it, they get their salaries. And maybe it might work. I'm skeptical, but
Doesn't pencil out.
I can always be wrong. But
Hmm.
meanwhile, the dust was a problem for them because they kept getting dust in the reactors, and they thought this was what's stopping us from succeeding. And so they decided it was dirt. That's that wonderful greatest fear of all Americans is dirt, right?
Hmm.
You know,
Certainly
oh,
is around this house. Yeah.
oh my God, dirt. And I
Hmm.
mean, the very word and the way it's pronounced, dirt. I mean, dirt. Just think of it, dirt.
Dirty.
So they used to say there was dirt in the reactor, and that it was contamination being brought in by people. So they put the reactors in these clean rooms, and everybody had to wear white coats and those nets on their hair for
Hmm.
stop dandruff and all that kind of thing, to stop even the tiniest speck of dust getting in.
Hmm.
And yet it didn't diminish the dust inside the reactors in any way. So
Hmm.
the answer to this was discovered by a very interesting guy called Gary Selwyn,
Hmm.
who's not really a plasma physicist. He was working for IBM. He knew a lot about plasma, but he's no longer working in science. But he, you see, you have to know that in order to make microchips and nanochips, the circuits are so tiny that the only way to get them deposited onto the chips is to do so by lowering them down through plasma deposition, it's called.
Hmm.
And of course, not many people publicly know the tricks of the trade and how it's done because um, those are corporate secrets.
Hmm.
And I would say that the people who know the most about it are in Taiwan.
Hmm. Of course.
Everybody's trying to figure out better ways to do this. And so IBM said, look, Gary, for some reason they chose Gary Selwyn, we want you to find out what we can do about this business of the dust ruining so many of our chips when we do our
Hmm.
plasma deposition. I'm just adjusting something there.
Pick town.
And so he studied it, and because he's a very brilliant guy, he came to the conclusion, was able to prove it, that plasma manufactures its own dust.
Mm.
Doing, doing, doing.
Yeah.
Plasma makes its own dust? How's it do that? He was able to explain that. And then this changed everything in plasma physics. It was from that point on, and that was 1989. From that point on, it became possible to really, truly understand dusty complex plasmas. So, for instance, these giant Kordylewski clouds, if they don't pick up enough dust from space, they make their own. And especially when they're intelligent, they know how to manufacture just how much they need and just which part. And they have fantastically complex internal structure. So they have electricity going through filaments known as Birkeland currents. They have nodes. They have plasmoids. They can have two plasmoids protected by sheaths next to each other, one hot, one cold, but the temperatures won't affect each other. One can be positive charge, one can be negative charge. Fantastically complex structures and circuits inside these clouds. And, I managed to get in touch with Gary Sullivan. He's doing business now way out in the west of the States somewhere. I forget where. Arizona or something. One of those places where they have cacti.
Yeah, there you go.
You know the sort of thing.
Yeah, not here. Yeah,
They used to have cowboys out there, but they've now got cacti.
yeah.
Anyway, he's doing whatever he's doing, and and seemingly making a good living out of it. I said to him, these are messages, email messages. Then I never spoke to him on the phone. Were you aware of the importance of your discovery? Did anybody ever tell you that you revolutionized the whole of plasma physics by discovering that plasma manufactures its own dust? And he said, no, he didn't know. Nobody ever told him. And they sort of dropped him, maybe because they didn't want him to know, because this was immediately wrapped up in a lot of secrecy.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that you can have dusty complex plasmas, even small enough to fit in a laboratory, that can become intelligent. This has got so many implications for the kind of people that you can think of, that the last people always to know anything important must always be the public.
Mm-hmm.
Get it?
Randall?
Yes,
Randall,
sir.
what's going through your head here, man? I mean, that's what I said. This whole thing, I mean, first of all, if I may preface, and might be what's going through your head, you can riff on it. But one of the things with Malcolm Bendall that was perplexing as a science geek is he would always refer to the plasmoids as conscious entities.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes,
you've already
I-
got this miraculous process underway. You're trying to figure out whether it's all valid. And then the inventor is speaking of the phenomena as though it were conscious. And I had never heard any such thing. And that was the wonderful thing about Robert's book.
well, yeah,
Is
that's
I said, holy shit, here's an entire book making the case that Malcolm, he doesn't even make the case. It's just a matter of fact that the plasmoids are doing this, the plasmoids are doing that, and he speaks of them, anthropogenically or anthropically.
well, yeah,
whatever
that
it
was
would be.
that was one of the things that I was really having a little bit more challenge wrapping my head around in the
Yeah.
Malcolm's explanation for all the phenomena that they were, it's one thing to say they're self-organizing, but then to go to the next step and say they're actually intelligent. Yet there he is saying that. Then I'm picking up Robert's book and reading that, and I'm going, well,
Yeah.
wait a second, this is what Malcolm is saying. So now here, two different directions are converging on this same insight, that there seems to be something here transcending just the mere material of, if we want to call it material of plasma. There's something else happening here, because as soon as you introduce the idea of intelligence, then it seems like we've transcended to another level altogether.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still trying to process this idea. I'm not, I guess I'm not 100% comfortable with it until I really process it more, think about it, digest it, and so on. And I'm still kind of on that inflection point of the learning curve. So,
Temple's book helps, though, doesn't it?
well, yeah. And now, like I said, I'm getting right into the point where looks like it's going to actually start getting interesting, as if it hasn't been already. I just finished a chapter, Plasma Comes Alive, followed by Plasma is a Dirty Gas. So, the mysterious case of the dirty gas. So
the dirty gas being Gary Selwyn's discovery.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's what I was picking up on here.
Hey, Robert, what is the dust? If it makes the dust, what is the element? What is the composition?
Well, it can be anything. And of course, it was Chandra's great insight that pointed out that when it's not spherical, but is instead what's known as a grain, which is like a grain of rice in shape, that kind of shape, when they spin, they can generate energy. He worked all that out because he had been doing that kind of thing before, so he knew about dust grains or carbon grains, and the dust can be anything that they pick up that they choose to use, and we don't know enough about it, but I should point out that these dust grains are nano-sized.
Sure.
So these clouds not only emit no light, but they're almost transparent.
Mhm.
And if you send a satellite through them, the kind of satellite we have now, it would detect nothing because the nanoparticles are at least 10, if not 100 times too small for
Hmm.
the most sensitive detectors of dust. And so I believe since my books come out and my paper with Chandra was published, the people at NASA and DARPA and all those kind of guys
Mhm.
are definitely concerned with increasing the sensitivity of the satellite detectors.
Hmm.
And you can be sure that they're already planning to start messing with the Kordylewski clouds. Now that is very dangerous because if they're
Hmm.
super intelligent entities,
Hmm.
they're not going to like that. Do you see what I mean?
Well,
Uh,
might they hope the best for us? I mean, might you hope that your dog discovers that
no, that
you're a
would be.
human and begins to communicate with you, even though it's your inferior?
I'm not referring to the communication.
Mm.
What I'm referring to is the people, trying to explode a bomb in them or sending
Physically disrupting them.
yeah, interference with them.
Mhm.
After all, look what happened to the atmosphere in the 1950s and early 60s. They exploded between the United States and the Soviet Union, who were in competition with each other, of course, in what we know as the Cold War. Were exploding atomic bombs in the ionosphere, and they exploded more than 100
Mhm.
atomic bombs in the ionosphere.
Mhm.
And they would do such. This was being in the control of generals,
Yeah.
and generals are interested in weapons. This is
Yeah. Yeah.
what they do, right? This
All
is their.
right.
And they're not philosopher kings. What we're dealing with
Mhm.
here is the entire survival of our planet and its atmosphere and of humanity was basically a toy in the hands of some out of control generals. Now, there were some logical reasons behind this. For instance, during the Cold War, we had what Americans call missiles, and which the British called missiles, but I'll say missiles. Um, they had all these intercontinental ballistic missiles, both sides. And so the United States, and I'm sure it was true the other way around, were very worried that the Russians would be capable of a first strike and launch their missiles, and we'd only have, I think, what is it, 5 minutes notice.
Mhm.
So because radar can't go further than that. So they had to develop something called over-the-horizon radar. And the way you do that is you beam your radar up to the ionosphere and it comes down at an angle and you can detect things that are over the horizon that you can't see.
Mhm.
So you get an extra 5 minutes warning. So instead of 5 minutes,
Mhm.
minutes, or who knows, maybe even 15 minutes,
Mhm.
you're about to die. And so they had to do that. They had no choice. They had to have over the horizon radar. I mean, it was simply an imperative. But that's all. That's one thing, and already that's disturbing the ionosphere. But if you got to do it, you got to do it. But they didn't have to do all the other things that they then started doing, blowing up all these atom bombs. For instance, there was one giant atom bomb which the Americans launched in I think it was 62, where it was so huge that they traced the plasma that came out of the exploded bomb as it drifted along through the ionosphere, expecting it to dissipate within a few days.
Mhm.
A year later, it was still there.
Ugh, how gross.
Now, I got that out of a lot of declassified technical reports. It's not in books. And I have a huge amount of all this geophysical stuff, far too much, even to read, much less to summarize and write it up. But the thing is that they were destroying the atmosphere. Now, we're worried about climate change, aren't we?
Mhm.
You know, here in Britain, they're hurtling toward what they call net zero because they want to have no carbon dioxide emissions at all by 2030 or whatever it is, 2035, you name it, 2050. Everybody has a different date on this, but they're worried about a single molecule of carbon dioxide reaching the ionosphere.
Mhm.
That is so inconsequential compared to exploding 100 atom bombs in the ionosphere,
Mhm.
Yeah.
which they
Yeah.
did decades
Yeah,
ago.
we're lucky we made it to the other side of that.
Well, we didn't, because the atmosphere has had permanent damage as a result of
Yeah,
that.
you suggest that in the book, but you don't go too deeply into it. You say that we're still wounded.
Of course, there is even a possibility that they totally destroyed the third Van Allen belt that was
Mm.
um, that's been covered up. But the thing is that the ionosphere has been changed and disturbed really beyond repair as far back as the 60s. And that was 45 years ago, 50
Mm.
to that's half a century that the ionosphere has already been broken. And so that is infinitely more serious than any kind of greenhouse effect. And
Mm.
why is nobody talking about it?
Mm.
Because that's the really big deal that happened. And
Mhm.
it's recorded and documented. And of course, a lot of it is secret, but enough has come out for us to be quite certain of it. And
It's horrifying.
this is damage that was done to our atmosphere 45 to 50 years ago by a lot of out of control generals who were worried about a nuclear war during the Cold War period. And they wanted to be able the Americans wanted to defeat the Ruskies, and the Ruskies wanted to defeat the Yanks. And this is what this war mania stuff is doing to the planet. You know, everybody, millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of people died in the 20th century for pointless wars.
Mhm.
The First World War had no purpose that anybody has ever been able to define.
Mhm.
And the Second World War was to defeat Hitler, of course, who was a maniac. But he needn't have come to power if it hadn't been for the flawed Versailles Agreement,
Mhm.
which was designed by idiots like Woodrow Wilson,
Mhm.
and the French in particular were responsible for that because of the insatiable vengeance that they felt.
Well,
Which
we're seeking the same kind of resolution to the Ukraine conflict, that there is no negotiated peace and leave a little bit of, strength and dignity on both sides just to get a deal done. It's destroy Russia and take them down.
Well, I don't want to comment on contemporary politics. I have enough problems without getting involved in those matters.
Yeah, I probably
So
just stepped into it there.
I'm not going to say anything about that, but I feel quite happy to talk about the two world wars and the things like that have been going on. The weird Korean War,
Mhm.
very weird Korean War. But there's no use going into the detail because most people don't even remember that there was one. No young person has ever even heard of it because no young person knows any history at all. In fact, the young people are being programmed to think that anything that's more than 5 minutes old is irrelevant.
Yeah, there's no interest in history any longer.
And
Hey,
that's intentional.
Robert, I'm surprised we've made it this far in the podcast without one particular term being used. And I'd like you to tell everybody of the importance of ball lightning. How
Yes.
does ball lightning figure into this? What is ball lightning? What's the history of it? And how does it, what's its importance moving forward technologically?
Well, I have one chapter in the book about it, in which I also make the point that I'm not going to go into great detail with ball lightning because there are so many books on the subject.
Yeah.
It's been intensively studied, although the findings are systematically ignored because they're inconvenient to standard models. But there are not just thousands, but tens of thousands of reports, verified reports of ball lightning, because the people who used to say it's a fantasy, it doesn't exist, they can't go on like that anymore because the evidence is so overwhelming that they just look like the fools that they are. So, okay, so ball lightning exists. Well, what is it? Then you have to get into the question of when has it been seen? It is so strange. Basically, ball lightning can be looked upon as a plasmoid. Now, I do discuss what kind of plasmoid. Um, the fact that plasma can exist in gaseous, liquid, solid, and crystalline states needs to be realized.
Mm-hmm.
I suggest that plasmoids are actually, ball lightning are crystalline plasmoids or
Mm-hmm.
plasma crystals in plasmoid form, because a plasmoid has a sheath around it which protects it, a double layered sheath, not unlike the cell membranes that are double layered, but in this case they're to do with charge rather than hydrophilic and hydrophobic. And so the double layers protect the sheaths, are the sheaths which protect the plasmoids. Now, ball lightning can, sometimes it can pass through solid walls and emerge intact on the other side. Sometimes it can bounce on the ground. Sometimes, oh, I see you're showing film of a typical ball lightning. And you notice it's interacting with the electricity in the tracks or the metal. And it is definitely an electric phenomenon. That's fascinating. I haven't seen this particular film before. Ball lightning this is a plasmoid that you're looking at right now. And you can see that it's similar to some of the glowing objects that are called UFOs, which I believe, as I said, to be plasmic drones, some of which have a very complex internal structure, and they can contain programs so that they're like little AI machines made of plasma, which are sent out with programs and instructions of you do this, you do that. And I believe that such things can descend on people sometimes with programming, and it can enter people's brains. And to go away from ball lightning for a moment, I need to say that I look upon all living entities in the world of physical matter, which is made of atoms, which plasma is not, as being double entities. So, for instance, you and I are plasma beings who have temporarily incarnated in physical bodies, which have grown from the womb and been born and grown and so on. And they are vehicles. And I call the physical body a smart overcoat. But all overcoats wear out, and then you have to leave them behind. But that doesn't mean you cease to exist. So reincarnation is absolutely fundamental to an understanding of plasma beings, because a plasma being does not cease to exist when it leaves the physical body. And now this is the good news and the bad news. The good news is that nobody dies. Everybody says they don't want to die, but just think about it.
Yeah.
The bad news is that nobody
You're
dies.
not going to die.
And that means you're stuck with yourself. And that can be a problem if you're a nasty character. And as I like to say when I talk about this subject, the only way out is to become a good person, and then you won't be miserable when you're dead.
A lot of the ball lightning research seemed to have been kind of cloaked in secrecy too, right?
Of course,
Yeah.
because look at it. Let's assume that you're one of the paranoid spooks working for one of the agencies, of which there seem to be, nobody knows whether it's 17 or 19 agencies, probably many undeclared ones as well. That's just in America, right? Then there's all the foreign ones. I mean, a very large proportion of humanity consists of really weird, twisted, paranoid spooks who are trained to be paranoid, because it's almost a job requirement to be a paranoid person if you're going to be a spook, because you have to be always worried about the enemy, and there must always be enemies, But I don't want to be too critical of them because the fact is that they do have their uses. They are often needed.
Right.
I don't wish to condemn them utterly. I just wish to tease them and taunt them and tell them what naughty boys they are and girls. So anyway, um, the the potential for anything that could even at the furthest stretches of imagination be used as a weapon means instantly you have to bring the secrecy curtain down just in case.
Mm-hmm.
And you're always worried about the enemy as to whether they know something you don't know, or that maybe they've got their hands on a plasmoid and know more about it than we do. And of course, these fears are genuine. I mean, we can make fun of them for being paranoid, but the fact is that their fears are not baseless fears. This is the irony that, in fact, even though it means that they become very weird, twisted people with totally ruined personal lives because they're not allowed to tell their spouses, their families, or anyone ever what they do. Which almost nobody can survive and remain even remotely a normal personality. So they all end up being really, really weird people, even though they're experts at concealing that. The fact is that secrecy is often mandated, and who's to say that they're wrong? I believe in an informed public. And I think that the public should be informed of everything possible that doesn't risk the public's safety. Now, of course, the spooks would stretch that definition, and they would say, well, that means everything has to be kept from them because the public are idiots. We're the only ones who know anything. And then they become psychologically ill, and they look upon themselves as superior beings because they have superior knowledge about secrets. So this is the danger. They become weirder and weirder and weirder, and they develop increasing contempt for the public because the public don't know what we know. So we're the ones, you see. And this gets worse every year. And then they develop a habit where they simply can't declassify anything. They just can't bring themselves. They can't bring themselves to declassify anything just in case. And anyway, they don't like declassification. They don't want to, they would rather never declassify anything at all. And they often resist FOIA applications and lie and cheat and hide and shred files and go to any length to avoid the public knowing anything because they don't want an informed public. That's the last thing they want. Well, have enough problems without an informed public, they might start making problems and asking questions, and they might fund their congressman. Fortunately, we've infiltrated Congress with so many of our own people that we're pretty safe there. But this goes on all the time. The secrecy thing is one of our problems. But how can you solve the problem? Because you do have to have secrecy, but who decides how much? And when do you go too far? And the fact is that an informed public can be helpful sometimes, not only trouble. You're just showing the conception flash.
Well, I was going to turn kind of the biology of plasma because you address that in the end of your book and also the spiritual dimension of it, but maybe address the beginning and then the end and how plasma plays a role. And let's go ahead and play this. This is the conception of an egg, and there's a flash.
Yeah, the sperm hits the egg and fertilizes it, and there's a light flash. That's known as the flash at conception, and you can see it on many YouTube videos.
I'm trying to find some good ones. Yeah.
Very good. You got some terrific ones there. Of course, I'm unable to have moving film in my book.
Yeah, that's right.
But there's also a flash at death, the death flash, which isn't on YouTube, and I describe that. And then there's the mist that arises at death that often comes out of the mouth and floats up to the ceiling. There are many, many recorded instances of that, and I discuss all that. And I speak of the life flash and the death flash, so that when the plasma entity enters physical matter, there's a flash of light. And when it leaves physical matter, there's a flash of light. My goodness, this is good stuff.
There's
you've
a
got
good one.
here.
Yeah, exactly at the moment.
Wow.
Okay, I haven't dug into the conventional explanation for this, but they seem to say it's got something to do with zinc. What's the story there? Do you?
Well,
Is it-
I don't know.
Yeah, flash of light. There's another one.
I never hesitate to admit when I'm ignorant.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I just see they mention zinc all the time when they're talking about it, like there's some kind of chemical reaction. Okay, so what you're saying is that well, that's a good one. That we are the overcoat for plasma, that the phenomena is intricately related to our conception and our death.
Yes.
So, but we must be disassociated from the rest of the plasma consciousness because we're not super beings and Kordylewski clouds, right?
Well, what I take to be the situation, and I could be wrong about this, is first of all, our plasma cells are larger than our physical cells, which is why sometimes sensitives can see an aura.
Mm-hmm.
And and that our plasma self is much more intelligent than we are because we have very limited physical brains, which can only process a certain amount of information, not as much as our plasma brains can process. And so when we have intuition, or when we have hunches, when we have dreams giving messages to us, it could be our physical self trying to get through to, our plasma self trying to get through to our physical self with messages to our rather sleepy and torpid brains.
Mm-hmm.
And some of us have better brains than others. And of course, some people have disabilities. Then they're kind of out of action mentally if they have a really bad disability, which affects the brain. And there are some people with very limited brains, and alcoholics, by the way, that is permanent, long-term alcoholics, have serious brain shrinkage, and the human brain can shrink by 2/3
Mm-hmm.
in a long-term alcoholic, which is
Mm-hmm.
one of why they become so vague and ghost-like.
Mm-hmm.
But see, our plasma cells retain their intelligence and are constantly trying to warn us, like if they know more than we as physical entities know. And this is why you might get a whisper in your ear, which is essentially from your higher self, saying, don't step off that curb. There is a bicycle coming. You just haven't noticed it, but I can see it.
Mm-hmm.
You see?
Or someone looking at you from behind.
Yes, looking at
Mm-hmm.
you behind, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And Rupert Sheldrake's done a lot of work on that. People staring at you from behind.
I might want an introduction to Rupert. I'd like to see whether I could get him to the Cosmic Summit. I think that'd be interesting, but we'll handle that offline. Hey, Robert, to put this in another context, a big takeaway from the book for me, and I didn't want to leave the podcast without you speaking to this, but it reframed existence for me because I did not account makes entire sense. And I don't think anybody would disagree with this, but 999% of the universe is plasma.
Yes.
The solid matter we see, the atomic matter, atoms are actually the exception, not the rule. Plasma is not the exotic offshoot of atoms. Atoms are the small corner of quiet, non-plasmic material. Is that fair?
Yeah. Absolutely. Physical matter that as we speak of it, which is made of atoms, constitutes less than 0.01% of the universe.
Okay. So wrap your head around that, folks. The planets, all of that. The sun is obviously plasma.
Yes.
But
And all stars are plasma.
That's right. And you're saying that plasma also is diffused throughout the universe in dust, in suns, in the actual connections, the electrical connections that they've now discovered that are across the universe, which
Yes.
happen to match our neurons and brain tissue microscopy almost exactly, right?
Yeah.
But
Example of
all of,
fractality.
yeah, that's the real world. We're the exception.
Yes.
So just as a physical matter. So then if you thought about it and said, well, why would intelligence reside in the atomic zone?
Well,
And in fact, maybe it's an inferior intelligence.
well, it's
Yeah.
an inferior intelligence, but I wouldn't run down physical existence.
Okay.
A lot of the mystics, especially some of the Hindu mystics influenced by Shankaracharya, for instance, who went in a wrong direction, believe that the body is evil. You know, a lot of some of the Greek extremists and Christian monks and so on thought that matter is evil, the body is evil. Let's go live in a cave and try and pretend we're not physical, and let's just live on bread and water, and all that stuff is nonsense. The whole point of being here is to be active,
Mm-hmm.
not to go hide in a monastery,
Mm-hmm.
and and not to become an ascetic, you know, with and acting as a guru and telling everybody to do their yoga. The fact is that we need to be active and participants in life here. That's the whole point of being here. There's no reason to be here otherwise if you're just going to be idle. And
Well, you
because,
got to work through your karmic history, right?
yes, because everybody's been here more than once.
Right. Yeah.
And there's all that to cope with. And so that's another discussion, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But the point of being here is to achieve things and accomplish things. Now that's very difficult because try and do any good thing in the world and everything's against you. You have nothing but obstacles. So
No doubt.
if you come to this planet with the intention of trying to help out and do a bit of good, you
Mm-hmm.
might only have a 5% success rate. And that's
Mm-hmm.
why you should never get depressed if you fail, because failure is the rule. Success at good things is the exception. But it's accomplishing the occasional and rare good things that's the whole point of being here. There's no point in being here for any other reason. And if you're one of those foolish people who thinks money is everything, forget it. You're just wasting your life. It's all going to be over in an instant, and then you'll be poor again. And the thing is that if you're interested in fame, that's pathetically irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
And fame and riches and all that. And there are people who think that they want to have 6 yachts and 12 mansions and a collection of Rolls Royces. Okay, if it amuses you. But the fact is, all that is unimportant. It means absolutely nothing because you're here for just a flash and then you're gone. And you have to use the precious time you've got on this earth to try to do useful and productive things that will be helpful so that when you leave, the world is a tiny bit better than it was when you came.
Mm-hmm.
Amen, brother. Amen. Randall, you got any thoughts? I think we're kind of getting towards closing. I tell you, I want to have you back on, Robert, because we got to talk panspermia. We can't bring it up here in hour 3, right? It's just too big of a subject. So what I'd like to do is to get you and Chandra on sometime before June and just do a nothing but panspermia discussion, if that's good with you. I've had Chandra on once. But Randall, what are some of your takeaways?
Well,
And,
I've been here. I've been taking a lot of notes as we go. Things that I'm going to look up on. I've taken some notes here on ball lightning, and I've got some resources. So I'm going to be spending some time here, investing some time in getting to know more about this whole phenomena. I feel like I'm in grade school when it comes to understanding this science, but I'm finding it exceptionally exciting. And
yeah, I find it that way too. And as a lifelong science geek, you think you've at least heard a little bit about everything. And this is a whole field that I'd never even gotten. I mean, who the hell knew there were 2 clouds of dust that get no mention anywhere that obviously, have some interesting properties that deserve to be investigated. Things like that you just find here later in life, and it opens up a whole nother path of understanding. But I was just thinking, Robert, what we want to do is not just talk panspermia. Hold on, what was my last thought? I'm sorry, I'm going a little bit blank. But Randall, you're taking notes. Oh, I know what it was. Could you pop up the thunderstorm generator in London, the
Sure.
big one? Okay, now I'm going to
Absolutely, I
put you on the
could.
spot, Robert. You live outside London, correct? Right? But don't you go into the office? I think I heard.
Yes, I have a London office. Mhm.
Okay. How close is that to Heathrow?
Oh, not. I wouldn't want to be close to Heathrow because of all the noise.
Are you on that side of town though? Or are you on
No, no, no.
you're on the east or the south?
I can see the planes going towards Heathrow from the window.
Okay, well, you can't be that far. Where I'm heading is, if you can find the time and there's no rush on this, I would like you to meet the device and the inventor. And the inventor is very excited to meet you, to say the least. Right. And he's going to be listening to this podcast and just as fascinated by everything you have to say as the rest of us are. But
He's in
like,
London?
he is in London. Actually, right now he's in India at a Indian military base where they've taken a very intense interest in his device. See, we went to India and he left our public demonstration and went into the arms of the Indian military with a couple other people, and they're taking a good look at the device. I don't think that's particularly secret. I don't think it's secret. If it is secret, it isn't anymore. But they're non-secret, and this is not a secret place. I don't think the location is disclosed just for practical reasons, but there is the thunderstorm generator attached to a very large grid-connected power station from a methane generation from a landfill. And the approach here, Robert, is that if you're going to commercialize or monetize the elimination of pollution, it seems like that would be easy to do. It's not as easy as you think, because you've got to find a way to wedge yourself into the existing things. So the story here is that since it does not emit pollution, the caps on industrial air emissions within the M25, your ring road, are extremely tight. So the limiting factor of this methane gas generator is not the amount of methane it could burn. It could burn much more. The limiting factor of its permit is its carbon monoxide emissions.
Mhm.
So roughly they could make 4 times as much power at that site at any given time if they didn't have to be concerned with their carbon monoxide emissions. So that's what's going on here. It's being hooked up, privately invested, to get it hooked up so that it can make more power with the same or less pollution, if that makes sense. Bottom line is, I would like you to visit this site, and I'd like you to meet the inventor and maybe come back and give us your impressions, positive or negative. Would you be willing to coordinate with me to maybe do that over the next coming weeks?
Sure. Yeah, it sounds
Yeah.
interesting. I don't quite see what's happening. They seem to be wanting to turn spherical bubbles into toroidal containment.
Yeah, this is bubble cavitation.
Well,
Right.
I'm very interested in toroidal forms.
Well, that's the toroidal magnetic moment is what this is all about. And there's a great researcher named Bob Grenier, and his site is called the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. I'm doing this for the benefit of the audience. I'll send you these separately, Robert. But the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, and he's an open source researcher who is doing hands-on experimentation and analysis of the experimental materials here, and is coming up with some kind of amazing stuff. So that's one place to follow this. Another place from the mathematical perspective, because all of this relies on a set of math that's been well documented by a guy named Marco Rodin that's called Vortex Mathematics. And those fellas have come into Malcolm's fold as well. Bottom line is that they're physical products here, and we want minds like yourself to take a look at them. And I just think it would be interesting, not trying to get your endorsement or anything like that. But I just think you're so close to plasma, and then you've got a fellow who's popped up with a manifestation of some of this phenomena. It's worth checking out. And actually, they're saying, you see those big round balls? See that thing right there?
Yes.
They cut one in half and then went and looked at it with an SEM and other forms of magnification where they filmed it. And apparently transmutations were occurring within the vortex.
Well, vortices are very, very mysterious and fundamental.
Yep.
We don't know nearly enough about them, and
Yep.
I'm not at all well. I mentioned them in my book several times, but without going into very great detail. But they they haven't been investigated sufficiently because a lot of the scientists think conventionally, and they think in terms of spheres, and they don't think in terms of toroids and vortices. Of course, that changed when they started the controlled fusion reaction, because they wanted to have these tokamaks, which are magnetic toroidal fields that are meant to contain fusion reactions. And but they existed way back in the early 60s. I have a copy of the New Scientist magazine published in 1963 with a gigantic picture on the front cover of a toroidal tokamak. And I think the article inside says something to the effect that 2 or 3 years more and we'll be there. And that was 60 years ago, and still nothing happened. So,
well, I'll give you one more place to go, and so other people will know too. And Randall, I'm going to take. Oh, actually, I don't have to take over now. A new paper came out. Bob Grenier, the fellow I mentioned, who's done a lot of experimental work in this field, and now has gotten a hold of Malcolm's devices. That can y'all see that paper there?
Yes.
Walter can figure a nuclear reaction. I don't know about that.
Yeah, they just published it January 2nd. So here's Grenier. He's a co-author right there.
Oh,
yeah,
Grenier.
brand new. But it's interesting. What happened was the work, probably without coincidence, at Taiwan University, the National University of Taiwan, which you said that they have some plasma skills in Taiwan. Well, this researcher, Ben Huang, and his team, he's been working on it for 50 years. They brought in Bob, and they published this paper while at the same time Bob's working with a physical manifestation of bubble cavitation, right? He joins this team, and they publish a paper that outside of Malcolm's devices, they have provided evidence and proof that there are nuclear phenomena catalyzed by the cavitation of water and the creation of toroidal bubbles popping, which has always been suspected and was actually the subject of some controversy at Purdue 20 years ago. And I think that fellow was probably right. So now they've published this paper, and of course it's taking a huge hurricane of shit on PubPeer and whatnot, and they're trying to get it taken down. So download it quick, folks, because the jackals are circling this publication. I have some experience with that with the Younger Dryas event.
Has it been published in Nature?
Yes, sir. Yeah, and scientific reports.
Oh, but not in the Nature magazine itself?
No.
Because I subscribe to that, but
no, it slipped through. It must have gotten some favorable reviewers. By slipped through, I mean it was certainly legitimate and deserving of publication, but these kinds of ideas aren't particularly popular.
Yeah, I can understand that. Well, I'll see if I can. If you don't happen to have a link to that, do you?
Yeah. I'm going to send you that. I'm going to send you the 2 YouTube channels, which is Alchemical Science with Jordan Collin, who takes it from the mathematical perspective, and Sacred Geometry, a whole nother corner or another room in this intellectual mansion. And so that's Alchemical Science. Bunch of great videos there, heavy stuff too. And then the other one being Bob Grinier's channel, which is the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. Both of these following every development in touch with Malcolm live. So all of it's being reported. And then I'll also send you this paper. And then maybe you can go visit the devices themselves. And just as an added inducement, accompanying you will be a hilarious, intelligent, and beautiful actress, Johanna James, who Randall and I are buddies with and who hosts the Cosmic Summit. And Johanna, I introduced him to Malcolm and his team about 2 months ago. And she has gone on to make 2 fantastic popular consumption videos explaining what she's seen at these same locations that I'd like you to visit. So
English or American?
she is English. She's as British as she can be. And she just did, I'll send you that video too. Her channel's called Funny Old World. And she does a lighthearted, she's a comedian, a lighthearted review of the science and the evidence and whatnot as kind of popular stuff.
What's she look like? What color is her hair?
She is a blonde.
Oh, I thought she might be a redheaded woman.
I would call her a strawberry blonde.
Yeah, she has a strawberry blonde. In fact, here's her video from yesterday, and we'll wrap things up here in a second. But this is worth showing just to tantalize people, and they can go out and check it out because it is an interesting way of presenting the information. So, this was her video yesterday on Malcolm's machine, and I'm gonna hold on, guys. I'm getting good at sharing. There we go. Share. Okay. So there's Miss James, who will be your tour guide.
Oh, yes. I'm not familiar with her. I haven't seen her before.
Yeah. And here is like, for instance, she's talking about the SEM results. Boom. There's some SEM. Boom, 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 boom. So what she's doing is kind of popularizing the science and taking it from, somebody who's not well versed in this stuff. And she'd actually probably have a great time interviewing you if y'all are able to get together. So yeah, so there's a lot going on with this. Your book came out. If it all be true, what we're dealing with on the physical side of this, it matches perfectly with your intellectual revelations in that book. And I don't think all that's a coincidence somehow. There's just something that says this stuff is not going to be suppressed any longer. We're not going to live in ignorance.
Well, you know what? My impression is that with the implementation of this technology, it's really just confirming a lot of the things that Robert is putting forward in his book.
Yep. Yep. He provided kind of the framework, and then the thing happened to be there. And you can imagine my astonishment when I went to London, hear Robert speak, and he's speaking to an extremely exotic, little known phenomena that is why I'm there in London. So a lot of fun. It's been a hell of a fall.
Well, it would be good if even one major implementation of a technological kind based upon all of this could occur, which would galvanize the public to turn the public interest into the plasma field.
That's why Randall and I are sticking with this. We feel the same way. And even, I think we're a little bit beyond this personally, but of course I had my doubts at first. But I mean, I got nothing to lose. And I promised some people, particularly some of the speakers at the summit, that I would get to the bottom of the Malcolm Bindall thing. And the funny thing is, the truth is a little bit like the distance to the wall. You walk halfway to the wall, then you go halfway again, you're getting closer to the truth, then halfway again. Thing is, you're never quite there,
That George is Zeno's paradox.
Yeah. But I like being really close to the wall. I feel very comfortable about Malcolm right now. But who knows? Who knows? It would be just as miraculous if it were one of the most fantastic, elaborate magic tricks and hoaxes imaginable. But we're going to see, and we're going to get to the bottom of it. Right, Randall?
That's what we're working on.
Hell yeah, man. Hey, Robert, thank you so much, sir.
Oh, well, it's been very interesting, George. And
Yeah.
Randall. Um, Randall, I hadn't seen you before, but I'm greatly inspired.
Oh,
And
thank you. And
Uh,
I've loved listening to your stories.
oh,
I'm just I am a history buff, and I feel like I'm getting a great history lesson straight from the horse's mouth here.
oh,
The fact that you've known personally so many of these people that I've read about over the years, um, hey, that's pretty good.
And the damnedest thing is he didn't even scratch the surface. I mean,
Oh, I
that's why
know.
we gotta do it again, you know, and just go through. You didn't even talk about how you went on the set of 2001 with Stanley Kubrick, right? Let's leave people with that teaser.
yeah.
Right? You were on the set.
I was for 2 years.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
the new
he was the voice of Hal. People didn't know that. Robert was the voice of Hal, remember?
and you knew the author of the book, Arthur C. Clarke, right?
Oh, yes. Arthur was a great friend of ours from 1966 until his death.
Well, we're going to have another podcast, if nothing else, just to talk about Mr. Clarke. He was a big hero of mine as a kid. And it's such a pleasure to have grown up and meet you and Chandra. And y'all were personal friends with him over decades. I mean, it's, you know,
Yes.
it's just fantastic. Give me chills just right now thinking about it.
Oh, well,
Uh, Robert, oh,
yeah.
did you know Fred Hoyle? Did you meet him?
Oh, yes,
I
absolutely.
figured you would have.
Sure.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
knew, Tommy Gold.
Yeah, and gold. We got to talk some gold. I love that guy.
Okay.
He was a
Wow.
wonderful man, and he great sense of humor, a terrific fellow. The three people who came up with a steady state theory of the universe. The other one was Bondi. I met him several times, but he was a rather diffident person, and I never got to be chummy with Bondi. But I became great friends with Tommy Gold, and well, Fred was also a bit diffident, but we got on well, and he was a wonderful person too, really. And of course, Chandra is absolutely a wonderful person.
Oh my gosh.
You couldn't
It's
find a
just a,
nicer guy on the planet.
yeah, he's literally one of the finest humans that we have.
Yes.
I got to test you on one. I hope that don't come up short, but it's fine because you've known so many of these. Did you ever meet Feynman?
No, I never did.
Uh-huh.
No, okay, that's a great failing of mine.
Well, listen, you know, what an amazing roster of characters. This has been great, Robert. Thank you so much. And thank Olivia, your wife, for putting up with my emails too, because I double barreled you all every time I communicated. So,
Oh, that's a good idea. No, she and I do everything together.
yeah, that's terrific. Okay. Well, until next time, gentlemen, thank you very, very much.
Thanks for
And,
inviting me to sit in, George. I really appreciate it.
That's awesome, Randall. Thank you so much for joining me at the last moment with so little notice. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
over and out from Raleigh, and hope to see y'all both soon.
thanks a lot,
Likewise.
George. Bye-bye, George and Randall.
So long,
Bye.
Robert. So long,
Bye.
George.